The small, pale hand closed on the bridle of the Duke's horse. William drew up sharp, the mare stepping sideways across the damp November road. He looked down. A boy, no higher than his stirrup, stood beneath him in a brown coat that had been cut down from a man's coat, the shoulders too square, the sleeves rolled twice at the wrist. The child had mud on his boots and a fine gold leaf caught in his hair, and the gravest face William had seen in a 12-month. "Sir," the boy said, "my mother cries every night." The mare blew out her breath in a soft grey plume. The woods behind them dripped with the last yellow of the oaks. Somewhere beyond the hedge, a sheep bell sounded once and fell silent, and the damp air carried the sweet, slow scent of cider apples left in the grass to rot. William dismounted. He did it slowly, because sudden motion frightens small creatures, horses and children both, and because he needed the 3 seconds of descending to arrange his face. "Every night," he said. "Every night. She thinks I am asleep." The boy was watching him with a clear, grey expectancy that William recognized as a child's absolute faith that adults, when properly informed, would fix what was wrong. It was a look he was not accustomed to deserving. He asked the boy his name and his mother's, and got the name Samuel in return, and, with the careful enunciation of someone who had been taught that names required precision, Mrs. Hale. William said nothing. The mare stamped. A branch of the hedgerow scratched against his polished boot. The sky over the boy's head was the colour of the inside of an old pewter cup. Autumn at its unsentimental worst, the light flattening everything and hiding nothing. Mrs. Hale. He had not heard the name spoken aloud in 6 years. He had spent those years teaching himself not to say it, even in the quiet of his own thoughts, even when a peninsular fever had held him for a fortnight, and the memory of her name was the only thing he had to walk himself back from. A single rook crossed the road low overhead. A drop of cold water fell from the edge of his hat brim onto the knee of his breeches. He felt it with the unreasonable, exact awareness of a man whose whole weight has just been set upon a very small plank of wood. He asked where they lived. "The orchard cottage," Samuel replied. "Past the miller's, 2 fields down from the lightning oak." William observed, in the mild tone of the man making conversation while his mind sorted through a great deal else, that the boy had walked a considerable distance to find a strange man on a road. Samuel corrected him. He had walked, he said, to the village, and there he had waited for a gentleman. Mamma had said they did not beg. Mamma had not, however, said he could not ask. William's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something the autumn air could not account for. "What is it you mean to ask, Samuel?" The boy's grip on the bridle did not slacken. He had narrow fingers, and at the base of his thumb a small, half-healed scrape, the kind a child gets from climbing where he has been told not to climb. William found himself cataloguing this scrape with a precision he did not understand. "She says tears are not forever," Samuel said. "But it has been a long time, sir. Would you come and see if you can make them stop?" William looked at the boy. He looked at the rutted road behind him, and at the thin line of smoke rising half a mile off from what must be the village, and he thought about the letter in his breast pocket from his steward at Ashbourne, and the business in Lincolnshire that he had told himself was urgent, and the 3 invitations in London that he had, for once, not declined. None of it, weighed against a small hand on his bridle, weighed anything at all. He said he would walk the boy home. Then he would go to the inn and think. Samuel asked whether he would return tomorrow. William answered, honestly, that he did not know. The boy observed, in a small, steady voice, that his mother would be expecting somebody now. William knelt. The damp of the road came through the knee of his breeches. At this height, the boy's face was level with his own, and he saw, without quite allowing himself to see, something in the line of the jaw that made a very old, very cold hand close around his lungs. He asked if Clara knew Samuel had walked to the village. The boy said no. William proposed, then, that they would not tell her he had stopped a stranger's horse. They would say he had met him at the turn of the lane, and that the gentleman had been polite. Could Samuel agree to that? The boy, with the child's absolute moral precision, asked whether this would be a lie. An arrangement, William said. Samuel considered this with the seriousness he had brought to everything so far. Then he nodded once, and let go of the bridle, and held up his hand to be lifted into the saddle in front of William, because he had evidently decided that a man who made arrangements could be trusted with the next half-mile. The orchard cottage sat 2 fields down from a split black oak, exactly as he had been told. Smoke came from its chimney in a thin, careful thread, as if whoever tended the fire was doing so by rule rather than by warmth. William set the boy down at the gate and stayed mounted. He did not trust himself to walk up the path. A figure moved in the cottage doorway. She did not step outside. She stood in the shadow of the lintel with an apple basket set against her hip, and she looked past her son and up at the horseman at her gate, and her face did not change. It did not need to. William had not seen her in 6 years. Her hair was darker now, the sun gold of the girl he had known, compressed into a copper brown, worn, pinned severely at the nape, and her eyes, which had once been the warmest brown he had ever been allowed to look into, had learned to look steadily without giving anything away. She was still the loveliest thing in the autumn afternoon. She was still the loveliest thing he had ever seen. "Samuel," she said. Her voice was pleasant and level, and had in it something he could not have named as rage if he had heard it anywhere else. "Inside. Mama, inside, please." The boy went. The door did not quite close behind him. The basket of apples on her hip did not move. She looked up at William Ashbourne as if he were a tradesman at the wrong gate. "Your Grace?" "Clara." "Mrs. Hale." There was a silence. He registered dimly that he was still in the saddle and that he had not yet said anything coherent. He registered, more acutely, that his heart was doing something quite ungentlemanly inside his ribs. He had rehearsed, in the course of 6 years, at least 40 different openings to this conversation. Lines he would say at chance meetings in London drawing rooms, in letters he would never post, in the pre-dawn dark when he was supposed to be sleeping. And every one of them, now that the moment was actually upon him, evaporated like smoke off a wet fire. He said, at last, only what a neighbor would say. He had met her son on the road. He had brought him home. She thanked him, gravely and briefly, and wished him a good afternoon, and stepped back into the cottage, and the door shut. It did not slam. Clara Hale had never in her life slammed a door, and she was not about to begin on his account. William sat on his mare in front of the closed cottage door for as long as a man can decently sit in front of a closed cottage door, and then he turned the horse and rode at a walk back to the village, because he did not trust himself to canter. The Green Man at the village crossroads was a low, white building with a good tap and a better fire. William took a room and a plate of bread and beef and a mug of something warm, and he ate and drank without tasting any of it. And he thought. When the landlord came to take his plate, William asked him, with the careful casualness of a man who has rehearsed the tone, about the widow at the orchard cottage. The landlord answered in the closed, polite register of a countryman who has learned what questions are safe. Mrs. Hale had come down from her aunt's, he said, 5 or near 6 years ago, when the aunt had died and left her the orchard. She took in sewing, besides. She kept herself. She was spoken of as a widow, yes. He himself did not speak of her at all, begging his Grace's pardon. She was a good neighbor, and her boy was a credit to her, and her business was her own. William put a coin on the bar. He was told he had the right of it. The landlord was a sound man. There would be one more question, he said, and then he would cease. Had any gentleman called upon her in those 6 years? Nor any lady? None, the landlord said. She took her own counsel. William finished the mug and set it down carefully. Through the small window he could see the last of the daylight bleeding away over a field of stubble, and the first thin stars coming out over the eastern wood. Somewhere in that dark, a small boy was being fed his supper, and a woman was sitting across the table from him and smiling, because she had been smiling across tables at that boy for 5 years and had not missed an evening of it. He went upstairs. He did not sleep. He stood at the window and watched the night find its full darkness over the village, and thought about a boy's grey eyes, and a scrape on a small thumb, and the line of a jaw. And at 4:30 in the morning, he called for his horse. The dawn was the colour of a bruise when he rode out of the village. Frost had crept down into the ruts of the road overnight, and the mare's breath came in white bursts, and William did not allow himself to think about anything except the next turn of the lane, because if he thought beyond that, he would not keep going. The orchard cottage was awake before him. A single candle burned in the kitchen window. Smoke came up from the chimney at a domestic angle, the angle of a fire built for breakfast and not for ceremony. He dismounted at the gate and tied the mare, and walked up the path and knocked on the door. It opened at once. She was in the same dress as yesterday, indigo dark wool, plain at the collar, an amber-red shawl pinned at her shoulder against the cold. Her hair was already up. In her hand was the broom she had been using to sweep the hearth. The kitchen behind her was warm and neat and smelled of toasted bread. Somewhere at the back of the cottage, a small voice was talking itself through the business of lacing a boot. "Your Grace? Mrs. Hale? Have you come about the boy?" "I have come about everything." She stood in the doorway for a long moment. She did not ask him in, nor did she shut the door. When she spoke again, it was quietly, and with a plain realism that had the weight of something considered a long time ago. If, she told him, he stepped inside this cottage at this hour, and any soul saw him, her son would have to live with it for the rest of his life. She asked him to consider that before requiring her to be hospitable. He took a step back from the threshold. Not far. Enough. "May I split your wood?" She looked at him. He said it again, evenly. He might split her wood, in plain view of any road or neighbour, for as long as she would allow it. And then, he might sit at her kitchen table with her son in broad morning light, as any man may who is helping a neighbour. She would owe him nothing. He would press no further advantage than that. But he had not travelled 6 hours from Lincolnshire, he said. Her name fell from him before he could stop it. Clara. To be turned from her door at dawn, and he would not turn. It was more than he had meant to say. Her face did not change, but her grip on the broom did. A tightening at the knuckles, quickly corrected. The axe, she told him, was at the woodshed. He was not to make a display of it. Breakfast was at 8. If he was still there at 8, he would sit where she put him, and he would not ask her son any questions, about his father or otherwise. Were they clear? "We are." "Then good morning, Your Grace." "Good morning, Mrs. Hale." She shut the door. The woodshed was tidy. A year's worth of cordwood stood stacked in 4 neat walls, and the axe hung from a peg on the central beam, clean, and the block was the correct height, and whoever had set this shed up had known what they were about. William set his coat on the rail and rolled back his cuffs. The frost was leaving the grass in thin, fading scribbles. A wren came to investigate and departed. He began to split wood. He had not split wood in 6 years. In the first hour his hands blistered and his shoulders remembered. By the second hour, he had found the rhythm that he had thought he had lost, the one that a man learns when he has been a boy at a country rectory, and his tutor has persuaded his mother that physical labour is the only cure for a sulk. The stack of quartered logs climbed beside him. The sun came up. The frost went. Somewhere in the cottage, a pan was set over a fire. A little before 8, the kitchen door opened, and the boy came running out with his coat half on and the shoelace of one boot trailing, and stopped at the edge of the yard, and stared at William Ashbourne as if the sun had risen in his own back garden. "It is you." "It is I." "You are splitting our wood." "I am." "Can I help?" "You cannot be near the axe. You may carry logs to the porch as I stack them." Samuel considered this, judged it insufficient for his dignity, then accepted it, and set to work with the grave industry he brought to all things. William watched the child's small arms manage 2 logs at a time, and his breath caught, very slightly, on the resemblance, and he corrected himself before it became visible. Clara stood at the kitchen door. She watched her son carry the logs. She watched William watching her son. She did not smile, but she did not close the door. "Breakfast," she said.
"Coming, Mamma!"
"Breakfast, Your Grace." "Coming, Mrs. Hale." The kitchen was warm. The table was scrubbed to the grain. 3 plates sat ready. A plate for the boy, a plate for herself, and a plate laid carefully at the further end, as far from hers as the table permitted. She served porridge with apples from her own trees cut into it, and thick slices of buttered bread, and a pot of tea that was strong and very good. William sat where she had put him, and ate what she had set before him, and did not speak until spoken to. "Did you split all of it?" Samuel asked around a mouthful. "Most of it." "Are you going to stay?" Clara set down her spoon. She did not look up. William said, carefully, "I am going to help your mother with the apples for as long as she wishes. When she no longer wishes, I shall go." Samuel looked at his mother. Clara lifted her spoon again. The silence stretched. A log popped in the hearth. William, who had negotiated with 2 ambassadors, a French smuggler and his own mother in the past 12-month, decided that a 6-year-old boy at a kitchen table in Somerset was the most dangerous creature he had ever yet faced. "I wish," said Samuel, "for him to stay a long time." "Do you?" said Clara. Her voice, finally, was not level. It was thin at the edges, as if the porridge had caught in her throat. She rose to take Samuel's plate, and her shoulder brushed, in passing, the back of William's chair. A touch she could not have prevented in the narrowness of the kitchen, and which she treated as if it had not happened. The chair did not move. William did not move. But his hand on his tea was suddenly very still. After breakfast, she sent Samuel out to feed the hens. William rose and cleared the plates from the table before she could stop him. She took them from his hand at the basin without looking at him and set them to soak. "Your Grace." "William." "Your Grace, I do not know why you have come. I do not know what you expect. I am certain you are unaccustomed to doors being shut in your face, and I am sorry for your discomfort. But my son has a mother who has spent 6 years making a life out of what was left to her, and I shall not allow that life to be unmade in a morning because a duke has taken a whim to ride down a country road and be courteous. It is not a whim." "Then what is it?" "I do not know yet." "That is a worse answer." "I know." She stood with her back to him at the basin. The line of her neck, above the collar of the dark dress, was the same line he remembered. He had once only, and not after, pressed his mouth to that nape, in a summer garden, in a month and year he had taught himself to forget. He had learned to not think of it. He was thinking of it now. "Mrs. Hale." "Your Grace." "How old is the boy?" Her hands stopped moving in the water. "He is 5. He is 5. He will be 6 at Christmas." There was a silence that went on longer than any silence William had lived through in the wars. He did not speak into it. He did not dare. She did not turn to face him. Eventually she picked up another dish and set it to soak. "The apples," she said, "are in the orchard. There is a ladder at the south wall. I will bring baskets. You may climb or you may carry. I do not care which. Only do not allow the boy up the ladder. He has no business on a ladder, and he will tell you he has." "Mrs. Hale." "Outside, please, Your Grace." He went. The orchard lay west of the cottage. 30 trees in 4 ragged rows, the grass beneath them long and silver with the melting frost. The last of the fruit hung red and gold against the black, wet bark. A small ladder leaned at the south wall, where she had said. William set his coat on a branch and began to climb. He spent the morning picking apples. Clara came and went with her baskets, Samuel trotting at her heel. The boy gathered the low fruit. Clara handled the middle branches from a second ladder at the next tree. William took the high ones. They did not speak except about apples. By midday, 3 baskets were full, and a 4th half-filled, and the Duke's hands smelled of bruised fruit, and his hair had a leaf in it, and his shirt clung at the back, where he had sweated through it and been dried by the wind. Samuel came and stood under his ladder. His small boots left dark prints in the silver wet grass. He had a single apple in each hand, and a look of patient, fathomless composure, and he waited until William had placed his picking knife in the small leather sheath at his belt, and come down 2 rungs before he spoke. "Is your name William?" he said. "It is," Samuel reported, with the particular dignity of a small boy handing over intelligence he had gathered at considerable personal risk, that he had heard his mother say the name once. She had said it at the kitchen basin while she was washing dishes. She had not known, he added, that he was listening. William came down the rest of the ladder. He wiped his hands on a cloth and crouched at the base of the trunk, with his back against the rough bark, so that his face was level with the boy's, and his voice would not have to travel. The smell of bruised apple and wet moss rose from the grass. Somewhere above them, a late wasp was crawling over a cider-sweet windfall. He told Samuel, carefully, that his mother had known him a long time ago, before Samuel had been born. They had been, he said, very great friends for a summer. He had had to go away to a war, and had not come back. Samuel thought about this, with the slow, considering gravity of a child accepting a difficult piece of arithmetic. He had the expression of a small judge delivering an unpopular but fair verdict. "Mama does not like men who go away and do not come back," he observed at last. "No, I should not think she does." "But she liked you this morning." The boy inspected one of his 2 apples, found it wanting, and swapped it for the other. "She put you at the far end of the table. That is where she puts the vicar when he comes. She's being polite. She's not being unkind." William laughed. It came out of him without warning, a real laugh, brief and startled, and it sounded strange in his own ears, because he had not heard himself make that sound in a long time. The boy regarded him with the small, private satisfaction of a physician who has correctly identified a difficult case. "Samuel Hale," William said, "you are a dangerous gentleman." "Mamma says I ask too many questions." "Your mother is correct, and I am grateful for it. Come, we have another tree." They picked the other tree together. The sun came over the south wall at a low autumn angle and made gold of everything, of the grass, of the mare grazing at the orchard edge, of the loose strands of hair at the nape of a woman who had come to the gate with another basket, and who stood now watching the 2 of them working beneath her last apple tree, without a word. Clara served dinner at 1. William did not go back to the inn. He did not think about going back to the inn. At 4:30, he split a further half-cord of wood. At 6, he carried water from the pump. At 7, when the dark came down hard and sudden, as it does in November, Clara looked at him across the kitchen and said, "There is a bed made up above the stable. It is clean. I have no other to offer you. And there is the village inn, and you may choose as you will." "The stable is more than kind." "It is not kindness. It is strategy. If you are seen in the village tonight, there will be talk. If you are seen leaving at dawn, there will be different talk. I am choosing the smaller talk, Your Grace. I am not inviting you into my home." "I understand, Mrs. Hale." "Do not call me that tonight." He looked at her. She was standing by the hearth with her hands clasped very tight at her waist. The firelight found her. It caught the copper brown of her hair and the amber of the shawl she had not once taken off. And it caught something else at the crown of her head that he had seen before, and not understood that he had seen, and which now, in the steady lamplight of a kitchen in Somerset, he saw. It was a comb. A slim, carved comb of copper, chased with a pattern of leaves, sitting in the knot of her hair. He knew that comb. He had bought it at a silversmith's in Bath for her 21st birthday, 3 days before he had been summoned back to Ashbourne by a letter from his father, and not returned for 6 years. "You are still wearing it," he said. She did not look at him. I'm still wearing it. Why? Because, said Clara Hale, I'm a woman of habit, Your Grace. It is a small comb, and it does its work. I've not had a new one in 6 years. There has been no occasion to replace it. Clara. Good night, Your Grace. The stable is the building with the lamp in the window. Please keep the door bolted. The wind is rising. He crossed the yard in the full dark. The wind had come up, as she had said, and the stars above the stable roof were the sharp, hard, cold stars of a true frost coming. The stable loft had a clean cot and a clean blanket, and a pitcher of water and a candle. He sat on the edge of the cot for a long time in his shirt sleeves, without lighting the candle, and he thought about a small jaw, and a pair of grey eyes, and a comb, and about a morning 6 years ago when he had left a garden in the rain because a letter had required him to, and about the letters he had written in the months after, and the letters he had waited for, and the silence that had come instead. He did not sleep until nearly 3. When he did, he slept badly. He woke to the sound of weeping. It was thin and carried on the wind. A woman weeping softly in a kitchen at 4 in the morning, believing herself unheard. William lay on the cot with his fist against his mouth and listened to it until he was certain beyond any further doubt. And then he rose and dressed and walked through the dark yard to the cottage door. It was unbolted. She had not bolted it. He took this information and filed it away. He pushed the door open 1 careful inch. Clara Hale sat at her kitchen table in a white nightshawl with her face in her hands. A single candle burned between her elbows. The fire had gone out. She was not sobbing. She was making no sound at all. Her shoulders were moving in the small, suppressed rhythm of a woman who had been doing this exact thing at this exact hour in this exact kitchen for a very long time, and who had learned a long time ago to do it without any noise that might wake a child in the next room. Clara, he said from the doorway. She did not start. She did not turn. She simply drew in a very long breath and lifted her face from her hands, and she looked across the small, dark kitchenette in, and her eyes were wet, and her mouth was steady. You heard me. I heard you. Every night, Samuel said. She did not finish it. He did not need her to. He closed the door behind him with the careful attention of a man handling a thing that might shatter at sound, and he did not step further into the room. Her 5-year-old son, she said after a silence, should not have told a stranger. He answered that Samuel had not told a stranger. He had told him. That is the same. No. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, the small, efficient gesture of a woman who had been wiping her face that way at 4 in the morning for 6 years. She had made an art of it. The art was the thing that hurt him more than the weeping. And then she said, with a very small smile that had nothing to do with mirth, that Samuel had told her he would come back. She had not believed him. The boy had told her the Duke would come, because he had explained about the crying. She had told Samuel that tears were not forever. She had not told him that men like dukes did not return to cottages because small boys asked them to. She should have. Now he knew, and he would remember, and he would think, for the rest of his life, that the world worked in this way. Clara, William said, Your Grace, is he mine? She looked at him. The candle between them guttered once in the draught from the door and recovered itself. Outside, a dog barked somewhere along the lane, and was still. Clara Hale sat at her kitchen table in her white nightshawl, and she looked at William Ashbourne with her wet face and her steady mouth, and she did not lie to him. She had never been able to lie to him. She had been able to refuse him and dismiss him and keep him from her door, but she had never been able to lie to his face, and she was not about to start. He is. William's knees went. He did not fall. He found the edge of the kitchen table with the flat of his palm, and he lowered himself into the chair across from her, and he set his hand on the scrubbed wood between them, and his hand was not steady. She saw that his hand was not steady. "Clara," he said. "Clara." "You did not know." "I did not know." "I thought you knew. For a long time I thought you must know, that you had heard and chosen. And then I thought, I understood, that you had not heard. But by then it was late, and I had made a life." He asked why she had not written. She said quietly that she had. He closed his eyes. "How many times?" 7. She had stopped, she explained, after the 7th. A letter had come back unopened. It had been returned from Ashbourne, with his seal on the outer fold, and she had taken the return as an answer, and had decided no woman should require an 8th. He could not answer at first. He had never, in 6 years, seen a single letter from her. He began to tell her what he had been told, and his hand came up and pressed against his mouth, because the telling was harder than he had expected. When he began again, his voice was low. He had been informed, 2 months after his departure, that Clara had married a farmer and moved to Scotland. The report had travelled through his cousin Henrietta, who had had it from his aunt, who had had it. He faltered on the word, and mastered it, through her own father's solicitor. He had been told that Clara herself had sent word he was not to write. He had written anyway. 3 times. He had received a reply in what he believed to be her hand, saying that she had found a life which did not require him, and was content in it. He had burned that letter. He had not written again. "I never wrote such a letter," she said. "I know that now." "Who?" "I do not know." She put her face back in her hands. She did not weep. She made a small sound that was not a sob, a single, soft, exhaled word that William could not have made out, except that he had heard it once before, in a garden, 6 years ago, when she had understood that he was leaving, and that he did not have the power to refuse. It was the sound of a woman discovering that a catastrophe she had assigned to fate was in fact the work of the hand. "Clara." "Not yet." "Clara." "Not yet, William. Please." He sat across the table from her, and did not touch her. He did not reach for her. He sat and watched her breathe and get her face back in order, and when she lowered her hands again, her cheeks were wet and her eyes were dry. "Samuel must not know," she said. "Not tonight. Not this way. Tomorrow, perhaps. Or next week. Or never. I do not know yet what is right. I shall follow your lead." "You shall." "I shall follow your lead in everything until you tell me otherwise." "You say that now." "I mean it now, and I shall mean it tomorrow." Men who have ridden 6 hours on a November afternoon say all manner of things before dawn, Your Grace. I am a woman of habit, as I told you. I shall believe you when I have watched you for a season. Then watch me." She almost smiled. "Go back to the stable, William." "Yes." "And bolt the cottage door from the outside when you go. I meant to bolt it at midnight, and I forgot. And I should not like to discover in the morning that I forgot for a reason I am not ready to examine. I shall bolt it. Good night." "Good night, Clara." He rose. At the door he stopped. He could not help it. He turned back, and she was still at the table in the candlelight, with her shawl drawn close, and her hands flat on the wood, and he said, "I am sorry. I know. I am more sorry than you will ever hear me say. Perhaps. We shall see." He closed the door behind him and bolted it from the outside, and stood in the black yard with his hands on the bar until his breathing steadied, and then he crossed the yard to the stable, and did not sleep, and did not try. In the morning he split wood again. Samuel found him at it and carried logs. Clara came and went about her business with the same composed pleasantness she had shown the day before. And that was what undid him more than any weeping. He could manage a weeping woman. He had no defense at all against a woman who had wept at 4 and was pouring tea at 8, and meaning every cordial word of it. At 10, she called him in and sat him down. She had a small paper tucked into the cuff of her sleeve, and she drew it out and set it on the table between them, flat and face down, and placed her hand on it as a woman places her hand on a Bible before she speaks. The morning light fell across the scrubbed wood and caught the ink lines bleeding through the thin paper. Whatever she had written it early, and she had written it with a pen that was not entirely kind to her hand. "Here is what I will and will not do, Your Grace." He opened his mouth to correct her on the name. She lifted her other hand half an inch, and he closed it again. He understood, then, that the mourning was going to be done on her terms, in her language, at her pace, and that the most useful thing he could do was listen. She did not read from the paper. She had written it only to steady her hand while she said the words aloud. She would not, she told him, accept an offer of marriage made this week, nor next, nor within any week of his first returning. If what he felt was true, it would still be true at the end of the season. Nor would she accept money, nor a house, nor a carriage, nor a governess for her son, nor an account opened in her name, nor a settlement in trust, nor any of the kind and perfectly ducal things he was about to suggest. She had fed her son and herself for 6 years. She had done it without him. She was not, she said quietly, to be rescued retroactively. They were clear, he said. They were clear, she answered. He watched her fold the paper in half, and then in quarters, and then set it aside without looking at it. What she granted him in its place, she spoke plainly. He might come and split wood, for as long as winter lasted. He might take Samuel on his horse on Saturdays, in full view of the road, in front of the village. He might sit at her table at the far end, as any neighbour. He might escort them to church, if his business permitted. He might write to her, if he wrote as he once had, and not as a man negotiating. He would write as he once had, he said. And if at Christmas she finished, when Samuel was 6 and William had endured 8 weeks of a country winter and a village with eyes, and still found that he wished what he thought he wished, he might then say so, and she would give him her answer. He observed, mildly, that it was a long wait. 6 weeks, she replied, was a very long time for a man to court a woman, Your Grace. 6 years was a long time for a woman to wait for a man. They should call it an apprenticeship. He would have laughed if the laugh would have come. It came 3 seconds late, as a rueful exhalation, and she accepted it with the same small nod she had given him at the orchard, and set the kettle back on the hook. The first week was the easiest. He took a room at the Green Man, and rode out in daylight to split wood, and to deliver a capon once from the inn's kitchen, and to carry apples to the market on her behalf because the wagoner had taken ill. The village looked at him, and looked at her, and did not yet know what it thought. He was scrupulous. He did not touch her. He stayed no longer than any decent neighbour. He left before the light failed. He wrote to her in the evenings, ordinary letters, news from Ashbourne, a comment on a book, a remark on a neighbour's horse, and she wrote back in the same register, neither warmer nor colder. On the Saturday, he took Samuel up on the mare, and rode him slowly down the lane as far as the second field gate and back again, and the boy's gravity broke at last into delight, and his laugh carried across the frost and lodged in William's chest, in a place he had not known was a place. The second week was harder. Lady Marbury called at the cottage. She came in a carriage with her daughter and her footman and her second-best police, and she sat in Clara's kitchen for 3/4 of an hour and asked polite, gracious, surgical questions, and drank 2 cups of tea, and left. Clara stood at the window and watched the carriage turn at the lane end. William, who had arrived at the yard 10 minutes before, had kept himself in the woodshed with the axe in his hand and the shed door pulled to, and had come out only when the wheels were gone. What did she want? "To see you," said Clara. "To confirm what the village has already told her. To discover whether I am a designing woman or a fallen one. I believe she is undecided. Her daughter is 19, and excellent at the pianoforte, Your Grace. I should imagine she is being measured against me at some length on the drive back to the hall." "Clara," Do not look so thunderous. She has done nothing yet. She was unfailingly polite. She remarked on the cleanliness of my hearth and the good manners of my son. She left her card. I shall return the call in a week. You shall not. I shall. To do otherwise is to tell the village I am afraid of her, and I am not afraid of her, and Samuel needs to see that I am not. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He had been in this woman's kitchen for 12 days now, and he had learned several things, and chief among them was that Clara Hale's judgment on matters of Clara Hale was better than his. Very well, he said. Thank you. May I accompany you on the call? No. May I ride past the hall at the hour of the call? You may. Twice. Once on the way, once on the return, and once only at a canter. Agreed. They did not speak of Lady Marbury again, but 3 days later, at the village harvest festival on the green, Lady Marbury spoke, and Clara answered, and William was there. It was a small thing. The festival was a small thing. Apples in barrels, a fiddler, a hay wreath over the church porch, children running with sticks. And on a small thing it is easier for a large harm to happen, because no one is prepared. Clara stood at the apple barrel, with Samuel in front of her, her hand on his shoulder, and Lady Marbury crossed the green with her daughter on her arm, and paused, pleasantly, within the hearing of a dozen neighbours. The fiddler had drifted closer. A pair of tenant farmers paused at the cider tap. The rooks in the churchyard elm lifted in a loose, cawing cloud and settled again. The air smelled of cinnamon and old apples, and the faintly sour sweetness of trampled grass. Lady Marbury remarked upon the boy. She spoke with the careful, musical courtesy of a woman who had been trained in drawing rooms, where every word had a second meaning, and every pause a third. Such fine eyes, she said. So very grave. So like his father, she dare said. There was a small, polite silence. The dozen neighbours heard it. They did not, yet, understand what they had heard. Yes, said Clara. She did not blink. So like. I am glad of it. Lady Marbury pressed. She had been told, she said, that the boy resembled his late father a great deal. Clara agreed. The resemblance was considerable. The neighbours began to understand. Lady Marbury's smile acquired the quality of a woman setting a trap within a trap. And one hoped, she added, that Mr. Hale had been a man of as noble a bearing as the boy himself. Mr. Hale, Clara replied evenly, was a very fine gentleman indeed, Lady Marbury. I thank you for your interest in him. Shall I recommend the cider? It is my own. It would have ended there. Lady Marbury would have taken her cider, and her daughter, and her intelligence, and gone home. But at that moment, William came across the green with a bag of apples over his shoulder, because he had been at the next barrel, and had lifted it over without thought. And he arrived at Clara's elbow, and set the bag down. And the dozen neighbours saw it, and Lady Marbury saw it, and Lady Marbury's face changed. She greeted him. She had not seen him at the barrels, she said. She observed, with the soft precision of a compliment that is really a weapon, how very generous he was with his time in the village. William replied that he was not generous. He was a neighbour, he said, and he enjoyed a festival. She attempted a variation. A duke at a village fair was always a generous thing. He answered that he had not been a duke that morning. He had been a man, carrying a bag of apples. The green was silent. The fiddler had stopped. Samuel, who had been leaning against Clara's skirt, had gone very still in the way that small children go still when they have understood, without understanding the words, that the adults have changed tone. William put his hand on Samuel's other shoulder. It was not a calculated gesture. It was not staged. It was the thoughtless hand of the man who had just set down a heavy bag and needed somewhere to rest his arm. The dozen neighbours saw that too. Lady Marbury, said Clara, quietly. I believe you were about to try the cider. Samuel, would you go with your grace and fetch the lady her cup? Yes, mamma. He went. William went with him. Lady Marbury, deprived of her audience and of her momentum, accepted the cider, made a remark about the weather, and withdrew. The fiddler struck up again. The dozen neighbors returned to their apples. It was perfectly done. It was, William thought later, the neatest piece of social surgery he had ever watched in a year of watching his mother operate and 30 guests at a dinner. Clara had ceded nothing. She had conceded nothing. She had rolled the attack back upon itself without raising her voice, and she had used him expertly, to do it. He caught her eye across the green. She did not smile. She only dipped her head half an inch. It was more than a smile would have been. Samuel fell ill 2 days later. It was the cold at first, the thin red nose and the thick voice that any child in a damp country autumn collects by November. Clara put him to bed and made a compress and sent for a broth. By the second evening, his fever was rising. By the third morning, it had crossed into the kind of fever that countrywomen whisper about in doorways. William was at the cottage when it began to turn. He had come for the afternoon, to carry more wood in because the cold was deepening, and he had found Clara kneeling at Samuel's cot with a basin of water and a cloth, and her face above the basin was a face he had not yet seen on her, and it told him everything he needed to know about the severity of the matter. He asked whether she had sent for a doctor. She had, at dawn. The man would come from Taunton, she said, but the roads were bad, and she did not know when. William moved at once to fetch him himself. Clara stopped him with a word. He would not go, she said. He was more use here. When he began to argue, she interrupted him. She pressed the cloth into his hand and said, briskly, that she must boil more water and see to the fire, and she could not be in two places. He was to sit with the boy. He was to keep the compress cool. He was to talk to him. Samuel liked him. Talk to him, William. He took the cloth. He knelt at the cot. Samuel's face was a terrible color, and his breath was coming too quick, in small, shallow drags that William, who had watched men die in tents in Spain, recognized, and did not allow his face to acknowledge. He wrung the cloth in the basin. The water was the cold well water Clara had drawn at midnight, already warmed faintly by the heat coming off the boy. He set the cloth on the child's forehead with a hand he had willed steady. "Hello, Samuel," he said. "William?" "I am here." The boy's eyes were unfocused and too bright. He said, in the small, flat voice of a child who knew better than to lie to himself, that Mama was scared. William said that Mama was not scared. Mama was busy. Samuel considered this, and then announced, with the devastating accuracy of the very young, that Mama made that particular face only when she was scared. William conceded that perhaps Mama was a little scared, and that the two of them would help her not to be. He was asked how. He answered that Samuel's only task was to get better, and that he, William, would sit at the cot for as long as it took, and the matter would be arranged between them. Samuel, with a flicker of honesty more painful than any fear, said that he did not know if he could. "I shall help you," William said. "That is what I came for." The boy's small hand found his. William held it. He did not move. For the next 6 hours he talked, at intervals, about small nothings. The mare and her bad habits with stable doors. The village rooks who had built a new nest in the beech behind the church. A story from his own boyhood about a grey pony that had refused for 6 months to be caught. He spoke in the low, measured, storytelling voice that country nurses use through fevers, that his own nurse had used through his own childhood fevers, and which he had not known, until this afternoon, that he remembered how to produce. Samuel listened when he could. He slept when he could not. The fever rose through the afternoon and into the evening. The doctor did not come. At midnight, Clara came back into the room with fresh water. She stopped in the doorway. William was leaning his forehead against the edge of the cot, his hands still folded round Samuel's, and he was speaking so low she could not make out the words. Samuel was asleep. She said his name. He raised his head. His eyes in the candlelight were the eyes of a man who had not slept for 48 hours, which, in fact, he had not. The doctor was not coming tonight, she told him. The roads, the snow had begun. He said at once that he would ride for him himself at first light. He would rest first, she answered. He would not, he said. He would, she said flatly, or he would be no use to either of them. Come. She took the cloth from him, and she took his hand, and she drew him up from the side of the cot, and she led him out of the small back bedroom, and across the kitchen, to the settle by the fire, and she pressed him down onto it. He was too tired to resist. She fetched a blanket. She sat on the edge of the settle beside him, and arranged the blanket over him, and her shoulder was warm against his, and her hair, under its usual knot, smelled faintly of apples and the sharp, clean smell of soap, and his breath, when he drew it, was a breath that caught. Clara. Hush. Clara. Hush, William. He turned his face toward her. She was looking at him. She did not move. He did not move. The fire crackled behind her. The light caught the copper in her hair, and the amber of her eyes, and the line of her mouth. And he had, for the first time in 13 days, no arrangement at all to offer. He had only what he had always had, which was everything he could not say. She kissed him. It was not calculated. It was not planned. It was the kiss of a woman whose son was ill in the next room, and who had not known kindness from a man for 6 years, and who had her husband beside her at last. She kissed him once, slowly, and she drew back, and her face in the firelight was completely still. "Do not say anything," she said. "I shall not." "Go to sleep." "Yes." "I shall wake you at 4. "Yes." He did sleep, for 3 hours. At 4 she shook him awake, and put a cup of strong tea in his hand, and sent him to the stable, and he rode for Taunton, through the first true snow of the year, and he found the doctor, and he rode back with the doctor behind him, and the doctor came into the cottage, and examined Samuel, and said, "He will do. The next 12 hours will tell. But he will do." Samuel did. By morning his fever had broken. By midday he was sitting up and demanding porridge. By the following afternoon he was in the kitchen in his dressing gown, half asleep against his mother's shoulder, complaining that no one had told him the story of the pony's capture. "William shall tell you," said Clara. "William knows the end." "William," said Samuel sleepily, "did you catch the pony?" "I did." "How?" "I sat in the meadow for 9 days with a bag of oats and did not move. On the 10th day, the pony came of his own accord." "That is a silly story." "It is a true story." "Did you really sit for 9 days?" "I did. It was the slowest thing I have ever done, and it was worth it." "Mamma says patience is the only virtue she finds useful." "Then your mother is a woman of sense." Clara, above Samuel's head, looked at William. William looked at Clara. The look went on for longer than either of them meant it to. Samuel, who had missed none of it, yawned largely and put his face back against his mother's shoulder. Samuel, his face against the wool of her dress, asked William whether he was going to stay this time. Clara did not breathe. William watched her, not breathing. He said, gently, that it was not for him to decide. It was for his mother. Samuel appealed to her in a single, sleepy syllable. Clara's hand, moving of its own accord, passed once across her son's hair. She did not lift her eyes from William's. "It might be," she said at last, "that he would stay. It might be that they would see. But he would come for Saturdays," Samuel pressed. "He would come for Saturdays," she agreed. Samuel declared that was all right then, and fell asleep against her shoulder. They sat in silence with the fire crackling. Outside, the snow had stopped. The kitchen smelled of the remains of broth and of the apples she had cut for the morning. William, who had not expected to live through the past 3 days, found that he was alive and that a small boy was sleeping against the shoulder of the woman he had loved for a third of his life, and that he was, for the first time since he had been 22, in a room that he did not wish to leave. She said his name, and he answered. "In the first light of Christmas Day," said Clara Hale very quietly. He might ask her. He said he would. And she would answer him, she went on. He said yes. But not before, she added. She had her son to settle, her village to settle, and she had to watch him another 6 weeks, and she would not be moved on that. He said he understood. Good. She looked then into the fire. The lamplight found the comb in her hair, the copper comb he had bought for her in Bath on the 9th of June, 7 years and 5 months ago. He did not point at it. He did not speak of it, but she saw him see it, and her mouth moved very slightly in the first real smile he had been permitted since he had come down the lane behind her son. Christmas came. It came slowly, as Christmases come in country places. The first snow stayed a week and melted. The second snow came in the second week of December and stayed. The orchard became a white, silent place, and the apples that had not been picked lay under a soft cap of snow, and the smoke from the cottage chimney was a firm domestic thread every evening across a firm domestic sky. William took a room at the Green Man through the month. He rode out each day. He split what wood needed splitting, and he brought what could not be got from the village shop, and he took Samuel up on his horse for the Saturday ride, and he sat at the far end of Clara's kitchen table at meals, and he wrote her a letter every night, and she wrote him one every morning. The village watched. The village drew its conclusions. The village, being a country village with a pragmatic streak, decided that whatever precisely had taken place between the widow at the Orchard Cottage and the Duke of Ashbourne was their own concern, and that the boy was a credit, and that the Duke split wood very well, and that the matter would, in the fullness of time, arrange itself. On the 12th of December, a letter came from William's cousin Henrietta, sent on from Ashbourne. It arrived by the afternoon post, bound in oilcloth against the snow, and the packet that accompanied it was heavy enough to settle on the bar of the Green Man with a small definitive thud. William carried it upstairs before he opened it. He closed the door of his room behind him. He sat in the single chair at the small desk by the window, and he turned the packet over in his hands twice. And then he broke the seal. The letter was in 2 parts. The first was an apology, written in the tight, careful hand of a woman who had been composing the sentences in her head for a fortnight before she let them fall on paper. The second part was the truth, and it was the kind of truth that breaks across a man's chest in a single pass and leaves everything behind it rearranged. His aunt, Henrietta wrote, had known from the beginning. She had written to Clara's father in the August of the year of William's leaving, offering, in the polite language of settled ladies, a sum of money for Clara's silence. The settlement had been refused. A second approach had been made through the father's solicitor, and that approach, negotiated with a man of limited moral range, had succeeded. Every letter Clara had sent from that day forward had been intercepted at the village post. Every letter William had written had been taken from the Ashbourne mail before it left the estate. The one reply William had received in what he believed to be Clara's hand had not been written by Clara. It had been written by a forger in Salisbury. The aunt had paid him £12. Henrietta had the receipt. She had the forger's signed confession. She had the bank drafts in her aunt's own hand. She had a copy of the last of Clara's 7 letters, still sealed. "I am sending it all by the messenger who carries this," Henrietta had written at the close. "And I shall never in my life ask you to do anything for me, except to forgive Clara Hale, if she will permit it of you, and to tell her that she is survived by no one who has not paid in some measure for her silence. I was 21. I did not know. I am so sorry." William read the letter twice. He did not move between readings. The snow outside the small window of his room began again, the slow, soft, downward drift of a country snowfall that has no intention of hurrying. When he had finished the second reading, he folded the letter, placed it and the supporting documents into his breast pocket, took his coat from the peg, and went downstairs and called for his horse. He did not open the packet again at the cottage door. He waited until Samuel was in bed. He did not open the packet at the door. He waited until Samuel was in bed. Then he laid the letter and the papers on the scrubbed kitchen table, and he sat across from her, and he said, Clara, I have something to give you. You will want to read this with the fire built up and a pot of tea close to your hand, and you will not wish me to watch your face while you read it. I shall step out to the yard. What is it? It is why. It is everything. She looked at him. Then she looked at the papers. Then she looked at him again. She rose, and she set the kettle on, and she said, "You shall stay. I have waited 6 years to read what is in those papers. I shall not read them without you on the other side of the table. Sit, William." He sat. She read. The first letter, the forger's confession, the bank drafts, her own 7 letters, folded in a bundle tied with string, every one unread. She read them in order, and she set them down in a small, neat pile, and she did not weep. At the end she sat with her hand on the stack of her own letters, and she looked into the fire, and the fire crackled, and the kitchen clock ticked, and outside the snow fell and fell. "My father," she said at last. "Yes. He did not live to see Samuel. He died before the boy was born." "Yes. I have made peace with hating his memory. I shall now have to revise it." "Yes. Your aunt, dead 3 years. I shall not have the satisfaction of confronting her. No. It is very hard to be angry at the dead." "It is." She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "William, do you understand what these papers mean?" "I do." "Tell me what you understand." He pressed the flat of his hand against the stack of her 7 returned letters. They had been tied with a thin black ribbon, his aunt's ribbon, he knew, because he had seen it 100 times around the wrists of the old woman's correspondence at Ashbourne. The feel of the ribbon against his thumb was the final small obscenity in a series he had thought could shock him no further. He drew a breath. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the snow was settling on the stone sill of the window with the silent persistence of a weather that has nothing else to do. He spoke in the low, even register a man uses when he is trying not to break a thing by saying it too loud. He had believed, he told her, that she had chosen a farmer. She had believed that he had rejected her unread. Between those 2 beliefs, a child had been born, and a woman had learnt to weep at 4 in the morning, where her son could not hear her. There was not, he said, an hour in their lives between that June and this November that they had not paid for. They had been young. The adults who had held the power over them had been cruel. They had been the price of that cruelty. He had loved her, without interruption, for 7.5 years, and no reading of these papers could add to that love, or subtract from it. The question before them, he said, was not whether she might now forgive him, because there was nothing in these papers to forgive him of. The question was whether she might permit him, at last, to be the husband he had been prevented from being. "That," he said, "is what I understand." She closed her eyes. "It is the 1st of Christmas," she said. "I had said you might ask on the first light of Christmas Day. I had not looked at the calendar. I had not meant this hour. I had not dressed for it. Shall I wait until morning? I shall lose courage by morning. Ask me now, William." He came round the table. He did not kneel. He had enough sense left to know that she did not need a kneeling man. He took her hand. He stood beside her chair, and he pressed her hand flat against his chest, so that she would feel, through the wool and the linen, the rate at which his heart was behaving, because he did not have the words for it, and did not trust his voice to carry them if he did. He asked her, plainly, would she marry him? Would she let him be a husband to her, and a father to Samuel, and a neighbor to her village? Would she accept that he would make mistakes, and agree to tell him plainly when he did? Would she do him, he said, and there his voice did break, a little, and he did not correct it. The enormous and undeserved honor of taking the name of a man she had already carried for 6 years. "I will. Clara. I will, William. Yes. The answer is yes." He sat on the chair beside her, because his legs were once again behaving unreasonably, And he took her other hand, and he lifted both her hands to his face, and she leaned her forehead against his, and the fire crackled, and the clock ticked, and she did not weep, but he did. He wept, quietly, for a long time, with his face in her hands, and she held him, and she did not tell him to stop. It would not, she said after a time, be a very large wedding. She named the shape of it, the village church, Samuel walking her in, Henrietta from Ashbourne if she would come, her neighbour Mrs. Paget, who had been good to her through the 5 years she had walked to church alone. That was all, she said. That would be enough. They would hold it on Christmas morning. It was 3 days hence. He told her then about the license. He had carried it in his inner breast pocket for 11 days. He had not dared to look at it since he had folded it there. She stared at him. Then she laughed. The first laugh he had heard from her since his return. It was the laugh he remembered, with something added to it that had not been there before. The quiet weight of a woman who had taken 6 years to be herself again, and had not quite expected to be. William Ashbourne, you carried a marriage license in your pocket through 3 snowfalls. I did. I am, in my own small way, a man of faith. You are, in your own small way, a fool. He conceded that he was. He told her she was going to marry him anyway. She agreed that she was. The wedding was on Christmas morning, in the village church at 9. The church was cold and beautifully decorated in holly by Mrs. Paget and 3 other women who had risen at dawn. Henrietta had come from Ashbourne on the night mail. Samuel, in a new blue coat William had arranged from Taunton, walked his mother up the aisle with a dignity that threatened to break Clara's composure, and did not, because Clara had decided, early in life, what her composure was for. Samuel stood at her elbow during the vows. When the vicar asked William if he would have this woman, Samuel watched William's face with the focused interest of a small judge confirming a verdict. When the vicar said the final words, Samuel said, in the voice of a person who had arranged the whole matter and was now satisfied, "There." The church laughed. The vicar laughed. Clara Hale, who was no longer Clara Hale, laughed into William's shoulder and let him hold her for the half-second the vows permitted. And then she stepped back and was a duchess, and did not know yet, because she had been a mother for 6 years, that she would be very good at being a duchess indeed. They walked out of the church into a thin, bright, cold morning. The village had gathered outside the lich gate, not crowded, not staring, but there, with bowed heads and quiet nods and small, new smiles. Lady Marbury was not among them. Her place had been taken by her daughter, who had sent a note of congratulation in her own hand 3 days earlier, and stood now on the steps of the church with a small nosegay of winter holly and an expression of careful, young, independent kindness on her face. Samuel accepted the nosegay on his mother's behalf. Clara accepted it on her son's. They did not go straight to the hall. They went to the orchard cottage first. William had said they must. Clara had known, without his saying, why. They opened the gate together, Samuel walking ahead. They paused at the kitchen door. William reached down and drew, from the pocket of his coat, the copper comb he had bought 7.5 years earlier in a silversmith's in Bath. The same comb. He had carried it all morning next to the license. He set it back in the knot of her hair, where it had been every day of the past 6 years, and where it had been, every day, the small, stubborn signal of a woman who had refused to let go. "There," he said. "There," said Clara. Spring came slowly to the orchard that first year, as spring comes slowly to Somerset. The snow melted in February. The hedgerows greened in March. By April, the cherry at the far end of the row was in full white flower, and the hawthorn beyond the gate was coming into bud, and a small boy in a new brown coat was riding a new grey pony up and down the south field at a careful walk under the eye of his father, who was splitting wood because he still enjoyed splitting wood, and because the kitchen at the cottage had not yet been replaced by a duchess's kitchen, and was not going to be, because Clara had insisted on keeping the cottage as a second home, for the apple harvest, and for the hens, and for the kind of quiet she had not yet learnt how to have in the hall. It was a Saturday. Clara was at the cottage hearth, kneading bread, her sleeves rolled and her hair loose, and the copper comb set on the table beside her, because she had been sweating at the oven and had taken it out. William came in from the yard with an armful of wood. He set it on the hearth. He looked at her. She had flour on her nose. She had flour on her dress. She had flour on the amber shawl she had refused to retire. She was laughing at something Samuel had said through the window. She greeted him by name, and he greeted her, and for a moment they only looked at each other across the kitchen. She spoke first, almost idly, of a letter from Henrietta. She wished to come in May, and Clara had written that she might. William said that was good. Then Clara added, more carefully, that the physician had been. William asked, in a single quiet syllable, what he had said. Her hand came up, and she pressed the flour on her palm against the front of her apron, and she looked at him, with the steady brown gaze that had, once, looked into an autumn twilight at a gate and refused to let him in. November, she said. He put down the last log. He did not say anything. He came to her across the kitchen, and he put his arms round her, carefully, because she was holding a lump of bread dough, and he pressed his face into her hair. The copper comb was not in her hair. He smelt instead only the apples and the soap and the yeast and the small, particular, unrepeatable scent of his wife. He said the word back to her, as if turning it over in his hand. November. She said it again, steadying herself on it. Samuel, she observed, would be 7. He would. They would have to tell him, William said. They would, she agreed, when they knew there was truly something to tell. Not before, he asked. No, not before. Tears were not forever, nor were secrets, but they would have them in their right order. Samuel appeared in the doorway then, with mud on his boots, and his pony's rein in his hand, and a fine spray of hawthorn blossom caught in his hair, and the gravest face he had ever brought to a kitchen. The pony, he announced without preamble, had stepped on a thorn. William said, gravely, that in that case they must attend to the pony. At once, Samuel asked. At once, his father agreed. William set down the wood he had been pretending to stack. He crossed to the door. At the threshold he stopped, and he turned back, and Clara was at the hearth with flour on her apron and the copper comb on the table, and the sunlight through the window making bright gold of her hair. And she was looking at him, and she was not crying, and she was not going to cry, and she smiled at him, and he smiled at her. And he went out to see to the pony. Behind him in the kitchen, he heard his wife begin to hum. It was a tune he did not know. It was a tune she must have learnt somewhere, perhaps at the pianoforte of her aunt, or in a parish choir as a girl, or somewhere he had never been and could not follow her to. It did not matter. The tune was hers, and it was warm, and it carried across the yard after him, and it was the kind of small, domestic sound that a man who had spent 6 years of his life believing himself unforgiven does not expect to hear in his own kitchen, and does not know, the first time he hears it, whether his heart will hold. His heart held. If you have ever loved someone you thought you had lost, truly lost, the kind of loss that becomes a weather pattern inside your chest, you will know why William Ashbourne stood in that yard for a half-minute, with his hand on the pony's neck, and did nothing. If you have ever cried at 4 a.m, believing no one would come, you will know why Clara, at her hearth, stopped humming and went still, and listened to the silence from the yard, and understood what was happening in it. And if you have ever had a small boy put his grave certain hand on the bridle of a passing stranger's horse, and tell the stranger the truth of his mother's heart, then you will know why, in their separate places on that spring morning, the woman at the hearth, and the man in the yard, and the boy at the pony, both took the same long breath at the same moment, and let it out, and carried on. Tears are not forever. Thank you for listening to Adrian's Fireside Stories. If you have a favorite line from today's story, perhaps Samuel's verdict in the orchard, or Clara's 6-week apprenticeship, or William's 9 days with a bag of oats, leave it below. I read every one. And if you would like another quiet hour by the fire tomorrow night, do please subscribe. The kettle is always on.